So, I want to review the controversial film Midnight Cowboy, which I consider to be the greatest film ever made. And I'm working on a short film script about a character with PTSD, and I've actually was watching this film again to pick up some notes because the main character does suffer from PTSD. And for the people who don't know what Midnight Cowboy is about it's based on a James Leo Herlihy novel written in the 1960s about this man named Joe Buck, who dresses up like a cowboy, goes up to New York City, and decides to be a gigolo. And the end result of what happens, he meets a man named Ratso Rizzo, and as he is hustling himself, and he doesn't have the best luck doing it, he does recall a very traumatic past. And there's a lot of things I want to say about this film. In short, the acting is phenomenal, especially Dustin Hoffman's acting. Like, John Voight does a really good job with Joe Buck's character by showing somebody who is very, very troubled. And they do a lot of great edits of just showing, like, his traumatic past and how he is affected by it. And with Dustin Hoffman's character, Ratso Rizzo, he is an extremely despicable character. And actually, a lot of people were very shocked by this film because they see Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate, where he played a very lovable character, to this film where he's extremely despicable. And the amazing thing about his performance is that at the very end of the film, you see him more of a very troubled person. Like, you see him a bit like Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson is a despicable character. Tony Soprano is a despicable character, but you have some feel for him because of what happens to him and his social condition. And they do a lot of just, showing that he's a person with a handicap. He has like a club foot. He does not want to end up like his father, who was a shoe shiner, and that's what killed his father. And also, too, for both characters, they do have a huge sense of like pride and ego. So it's very easy to kind of understand why these people are desperate for better lives and why these people are desperate in general, because they're both homeless. The other thing that I want to talk about is the editing of the film. This is one of the greatest films ever made in film editing. I think they say Battleship Potemkin is number one, but this is definitely a list of maybe the top 50 films with the best editing in the world. And Raging Bull, I think, is considered the best American film, and Midnight Cowboy is up there, and so is The Deer Hunter. But they do a lot of quick cuts. They do a lot of cuts where they intertwine, like flashbacks and sometimes different sequences. Like at the end of at towards the end of the movie, you see Joe Buck prostitute himself, and then you kind of see him helping out his friend. So it kind of shows you almost like what's going on concurrently and what's happening in the future. So it's very interesting editing. And then there is a lot of crossfades. There is a lot of shots where it looks very diffused and bright, because it's trying to tell you that this is either what Joe Buck is imagining, or this is just him foreshadowing. This is him reliving something in his past that was a happy moment. And he does have PTSD, so you'll see a lot of cuts of his past that are jump cuts, and a lot of things done in fast motion just to give you a sense of unease. The cinematography is very amazing in this film. It actually won a few awards for cinematography, but not nominated for the Oscar. I believe it won the BAFTA for best cinematography, but I'm not sure. But I think that, but the things I like about the cinematography is they use a lot of crossfades. There's this famous shot of Joe Buck walking in New York City, and it's shot with a huge telephoto lens. So it kind of gives a sense of how it kind of makes a visual metaphor about how he is kind of lost in the city. He's this guy dressed up as a cowboy with a really big hat while everybody else isn't. So he is somebody who's a little out of touch. They do a lot of zooms and a lot of tracking shots in this film. And they also just do a lot of it shows they show the passage of time. You see these faucets in their house, and then you see it all dripping water, then you see it frozen. So it's one of those things too that you really have to slow down a bit when you watch this film and really just see how the shot choices are telling you that time has moved on. And I also feel that like also the art production is done very well. Like they do like this, they show like this Andy Warhol drug psychedelic party, and I really love the art production. Like when I first saw the film, like over 10 years ago, my jaw dropped because I was like so stunned at the art production and the level of cinematography, and also like there's this really good scene towards the end of the film where John Voight's character Joe Buck is meeting this girl, and they're in a dark room, and it's all like this vivid red. So I really love the experimental nature of this film. This film was directed by I don't remember his name. It's off the top of my head, but he did the film Darling. He did Billy Liar, and he did Marathon Man. And this director, no, John Schlesinger. He did Sunday Bloody Sunday, and a lot of a lot of his directing is really good, but also just how the cinematography is done is very well done. So I've learned a lot by watching this film, but I also seen his filmography and I've seen his style of work where he does focus on like characters that are losers, characters that are kind of like just a little bit of like outcast. Billy Liar, his film Billy Liar, he really focused on somebody who had issues with an overreactive imagination, and you kind of see that play off in Dustin Hoffman's character and Joe Buck's character, imagining himself as something greater, and also too, him with PTSD. So I think like that really shines. In films like Darling that he did, you see a lot of shots of like cities or overhead shots from buildings. You see a lot of like fast motion even, and you see a lot of like like text. Like I know in this film there's a lot of like the letter X appears a lot in a lot of different shots, and there's a lot of shots of billboards. So a lot of shots like have text and dialogue in them. So, and you see that in his earlier work. So I think he really captured that. And I would also say that another thing about his directing is that I've read James Lew Hurley's novel Midnight Cowboy. I haven't gotten through it, but I'm gonna read it again this week. But I read Season of the Witch, and when I read Season of the Witch, which is about the later 60s, and it shows really the drug and psychedelic culture. When I see how vivid that James Leo Hurley novel is, and then I see how John Schlesinger adapted Midnight Cowboy, another James Leo Hurley novel, into Midnight Cowboy, it's very evidential that he hit all the marks of James Leo Hurley's style. Like there is definitely you really feel like you are part of the 1960s watching this film. There are so many shots of New York City and Texas and other stuff, just like the movie Taxi Driver, where you watch it and you feel like you've gone in a time machine and then you're in the late 1960s. And I really love that effect. But I also feel like, there's a lot of slice of life within this. You see how there's different crowds of people. There's different crowds of like artistic or outcast types of people. Just like in the James Leo Hurley books. So it really, really captures it. So I really think this is overall a very well-made film. There are some things that I did not like about this film. It poorly talked about Joe Buck's character and his past. Because in the book, it's revealed that what happened to him was that he grew up with a grandmother that was sexually abusive, and then in his later years when he was a teenager, there was this girl named Crazy Annie, and what would happen is a lot of guys would have sex with her. She was very open sexually, and I believe like she was a preacher's daughter, so it's kind of like that stereotype of like all the preacher's daughter is the biggest slut in this town. So she was letting a lot of teenage boys have sex with her at a movie theater nonstop, and then what happened was that she ends up falling in love with Joe Buck. So, then she starts to just have sex with him. And then guys get really jealous that, that she's not making herself open. So they decide to rape her and then she gets put in a lunatic asylum. But because she's so shocked from what happened, she blames Joe Buck. And what happens to Joe Buck is he has rape, and the crime of rape was not treated as such a big deal back then. So he was just told to serve in the Vietnam War to pay for his crimes. And what happens is that when he is enlisted, he finds out that his grandmother died. So then when he found out that his grandmother died, he gets like shell shocked, and that's how he gets kicked out of war. But that's really all I know. That's really all that's told about his backstory within the book. But when you see a lot of the quick cuts and the quick flashbacks within Midnight Cowboy, unless you read the source material, you're very confused about what's going on. And I think that is a very, very lost opportunity, because that would have added a lot to the character. But then the problem is that I think that if you kind of added all of that in, as one filmmaker was telling me, show don't tell. So sometimes it's kind of like, it gives a sense of mystery, but it also kind of gives a sense of, this film could have been an extra, hour and a half talking about all the stuff, and then it would have probably watered it down. And maybe it's something that I don't like, that his past wasn't really like explained in a way that a lot of people would get unless you read the book. But maybe that's for the better. But I think that there was a lot of missed opportunities. I also do feel like with Dustin Hoffman's acting, and he does this in a lot of his films, that there are some scenes where he speaks a little too much, or he acts a little too much. I feel, because I know like there are some scenes, I think like, when he was like walking to his apartment building, he was like saying, watch your head, you can't get insurance. And he was kind of like, breaking down a fence to get into his apartment that's in a condemned building. He said like, that's just the back way and stuff like that. Sometimes we need to do this with actors too, that sometimes they just need to like not say so much dialogue, because sometimes it becomes a little annoying. But then again, Ratso Rizzo's character that Dustin Hoffman's been played in this film, he is a loudmouth, he is annoying, he is somebody that that wants to be heard. So maybe that kind of plays out. But I think that overall this is a really well-made film. It's the only film in history to win any Oscars for being X-rated. And it's the only film in history to win an Oscar for being X-rated. And nowadays there's been no film that's been NC-17 that's even been nominated for Best Picture, to what my knowledge is. So, this is a very well-made film. It's one of the greatest films ever made. And I think at the time it really resonated with a lot of people, because it did have a lot of different themes. And I want to just talk about the themes really quickly in Midnight Cowboy. That when I first watched this 10 years ago, I was in a really bad place in my life. I was really, really depressed. So I kind of resonated with the Joe Buck character of somebody who has a very traumatic past, just like I do. I remember 10 years ago, I graduated college. I had a really crappy job, and then I had some PTSD from that job, because that job was robbed by its own security guards, and there were police there that were being, that were just doing very inappropriate things, and aiming guns at people and smiling and other stuff like that. So I got PTSD from that. But also, too, when I look at the character of Joe Buck, I see somebody with PTSD like I've had. And then I also kind of see somebody who thinks of happy moments in their past and kind of wants to get back to that. There was this girl that I fell in love with in college, and it didn't kind of work out the way I wanted to. It was a love at first sight thing, and I kind of have better knowledge of that now. But I wish that led to a relationship. But I remember resonating with Joe Buck, because I'm I feel like I lost an opportunity. And then when I got out of college, college was so much better. College was so much nicer. I was so happy in college. I remember one dream that's really disturbing. And one dream I had was that there was this big snowy hill. I went to school in Vermont. That there was this big snowy hill in Vermont, right by my college. And I just drove in a car, and I drove off of that car and killed myself, because I was like, you know what? I don't want to face the real world. I just want to die in college. And when I see the flashbacks that Joe Buck has of, wanting to go back to that time in his life where him and Crazy Annie were having sex and they were loving each other, it resonated with me. And we all have that, where there are times in our life where the past was so much better and we want to be in that past. But, I think what I've learned is you almost have to like look at what made you happy in the past and find it in the future, but in a better way. While college made me happy and I felt very valued, I found a group of filmmakers that I'm trying to find a group of filmmakers and artists and other people that makes a happy environment for me. So then I would have the same happiness I had in the past. This girl that I'm in love with, we broke off our friendship a few days ago. Like, we're still like, we've been friends for like 10 years, but I've honestly like, have had to move on just to kind of feel like, happy. And but I know that, there's other girls that I'm talking to, like some girlfriends and other people who have an interest in me. So in many ways, I've kind of learned to find what made me happy in the past and make it happen in the future again, but with more life experience and all that. Whereas you look at a character like Joe Buck, where he is very scarred, and he was at a time when talking to psychologists and other stuff wasn't the norm or was a sign of weakness. He is somebody like with PTSD and somebody who has coping issues, and he suffers for that, both in the book and in the movie itself. So I think that one big theme is somebody who is stuck in their past and how much that is a big piece of hell. The other thing that I love about this film is that it does talk about homosexuality. Back in the 1960s, being gay was a very, very taboo thing. And actually, John Schlesinger, the filmmaker, was gay, and that was very, very taboo at that time. You could have been blackballed for that. James Lou Hurley, he was the author of Midnight Cowboy. He was gay too, and he could have easily, I'm not sure if people knew about it, but he could have easily been blackballed. And also at that time, and also at that time too, and especially in that film, the reason why Joe Buck is into sex and Ratso Rizzo has such a big ego is because, they hang out with each other. Sometimes they hang out downtown New York City, where there's a lot of like gay clubs and other stuff like that. So they always kind of have a need to be like, I'm not gay, so I'm going to have sex with a lot of women. I'm not gay, so I'm going to just, show that I'm a tough person. And that's never a good attitude, because, you're forcing your sexuality on other people, or you're kind of like, overcompensating to show that you're not gay. But that was kind of a very serious thing back then. There are some people who have read the book Midnight Cowboy and actually watched the film Midnight Cowboy and assumed that Joe Buck's character and John Voight's character, Joe Buck's character and Joe Buck and Ratso Rizzo are a homosexual couple, and that may be true or not, but that's not. I'm not sure there's a lot of evidence to that. And I also think that the other thing is that there's definitely a theme of like the power of friendship too. That sometimes people can be despicable, or sometimes people can be outcast, and sometimes you can say somebody has a really bad character, but there is some good to them. Like, I think one of my favorite scenes in Midnight Cowboy is that there's a scene where Ratso Rizzo and Joe Buck go to a cemetery, and you see Ratso Rizzo like take flowers from somebody's grave and drop it on his father's grave. And I love that scene because it's such a juxtaposition, because it shows how despicable he is, but it shows how he has a huge sense of care at the same time for somebody. And that really sums up his character. And that really shows what a complex character he is. And it also kind of shows that there are people like him who pickpocket, who take advantage of people, but there is some good to him, and then he's also a lonely person. So it's almost like saying that, when you are buddies with somebody, even with somebody of a low character, you can find some good with them. But obviously the smart thing to do is to not be somebody who makes friends with people who are despicable. with Joe Buck, it's almost like liking a relative who has problems, but there is some good to them. Like you just tolerating a bit of a problem. I really would also say that in general, this is a really great film. Everybody should really check it out. It's one of the best films I've ever seen in my life. The writing's good, the dialogue is good. I would say 10 out of 10. This is the greatest film ever made. And I've kind of said that a couple of years ago, and I still kind of hold up to that. I think it's very well made. It's very experimental. It was very cutting edge at that time. It shows a lot of social realism, and it shows a lot of honesty about like how life was. I do think that there are some scenes that should have been cut out. There are some scenes that I felt were a little too gimmicky or unnecessary. And I tend to be the person that doesn't like humor or campiness in a film, because I know like there's one scene where they're freezing, where Joe Buck and Ratso Rizzo are freezing in an apartment, and they're listening to a song called Orange Juice on Ice, so they're just dancing a little bit because they're shivering. And I kind of felt that was a little like unnecessary, and I don't like that in films because I feel like that's too silly. And then there's a one scene where Joe Buck is like walking in the middle of the road, and then he almost gets hit by a taxi, and then he kind of like kicks the front of it. And I kind of felt that wasn't necessary. It doesn't really move the plot forward or show a change in time. It's just like, adding a bit of comic relief. But I think that there is good comic relief in the film. And also, too, this was at a time where you could not really show a lot of sex in movies, even though the Hays Code got lifted 1 or 2 years earlier than that. They still had to kind of, like graphic sex and stuff like that, they still had to kind of like use a lot of sexual innuendos. Because there's a scene where Joe Buck and this girl are having sex in the bed, and they fall over and they fall on top of a remote, and then you see a lot of commercials that apply a lot of sexual innuendos, like beans pouring out of a can. You hear like people, you see scenes of Godzilla spitting fire, and you see like a woman screaming and stuff like that. So when I saw like those types of clips play as a sexual innuendo, when they fell over, they fall onto a bed, they land on a remote, you see all these commercials, and these commercials kind of allude to the fact that they're having sex and how they're having sex. I found that funny, and I think that they could have just stuck with stuff like that. Or even like that scene where Ratso Rizzo has a pipe dream of going to Florida because he thinks that Joe Buck's finally able to do gigolo work, but he actually fails. I think that that's a funny scene. They don't need other stuff. So I think that what I would kind of say to anybody is that when you do a film, you have to kind of watch how much comedy you're putting into a story, because sometimes if you put in too much comedy, it really, really takes away, and then nobody's really going to want to watch it. Overall, I would really say that this is one of the greatest films ever made. I really think everybody should watch this, and if you are a Jon Voight fan in 2020, or if you're a younger generation who is really getting into movies, and you like Dustin Hoffman, or your parents showed you The Graduate, or if you like Jon Voight and you've heard of his work, or you like Angelina Jolie and you find out that Jon Voight's her dad, then you look at his filmography. I think Midnight Cowboy is very, very essential. It really should be taught to film students, and I also really feel like it really captures, in a lot of ways, very complex characters by showing their psychology, by showing their dreams and wishes. It's extremely, a powerful adaptation, a near perfect adaptation of the book. And I think that that's why it's one of the greatest films ever made. And I cannot stop recommending this film. It will always have a place in my heart as one of the greatest films ever made, and a film that has really resonated with me through a tough past in my life, and has helped me in this tough path of wanting to be a filmmaker that makes very powerful and emotional statements.